I was rinsing the dishes when Eric came into the kitchen. He stood there behind me longer than usual, silent, like he was waiting for the right moment. Then he spoke. "We're going to Hawaii, and you're staying to take care of Sophie." The plate in my hand slipped slightly, clinking against the sink. It didn't break, just made a sharp, hollow sound. I turned slowly. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were glued to the window, pretending to study the weather or maybe the streetlights. I asked calmly, just needing clarity. "What? My family. Mom, me, Sophie." "Dad's not coming, his knee's acting up again," he replied with a shrug, as if he were talking about a grocery run. "And I'm just staying home." "I know it sounds weird," Eric muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "But Mom thinks it makes the most sense. You're close to Sophie. You get her. She trusts you." He smiled, that forced smile I'd started seeing more often in the last year. The one he wore when he knew he was saying something wrong, but didn't care enough to stop. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why no one had talked to me before booking flights, or why his wife of 2 years wasn't considered part of this family trip. I just dried my hands one by one and felt something inside me quietly click out of place. Later that evening, Cynthia came by. My mother-in-law didn't knock. She never knocked. She walked in with her red luggage and a clipboard in her hand. "Sophie's meds are at 9 a.m. and 8 p.m., she said crisply. "No peanuts. She doesn't like loud noises at night, so keep the TV volume down. Laundry's already sorted. Please fold it left to right, not the other way around." She didn't ask if I agreed to anything. She didn't thank me. It wasn't a request. It was a delegation, an expectation. I nodded, the kind of nod you give when you've stopped expecting kindness. From the couch, Sophie sat quietly, her eyes following me. There was something knowing in her gaze, something that made me pause. For a girl who was supposedly nonverbal and immobile, her presence filled the room with a kind of quiet awareness I'd never been able to name before. Eric and I lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina. I used to work at a local bank before I stepped down, partly to help with family things, mostly because Eric said I deserved a break. These days, my world had shrunk down to grocery lists, silent dinners, and folding towels under Cynthia's watchful glare. The more time passed, the more I became invisible in this family, except when they needed something. When I baked, it was expected. When I learned basic sign language to better communicate with Sophie, it was sweet but unnoticed. No one ever asked how I was doing. Not even Eric. Especially not Eric. The morning they left for Hawaii, I woke up at 6. Eric had already gone. His note on the fridge just said, "Flight's early. Be safe." Cynthia sent a single text at 7:12 a.m. "We're off. Remember, no peanuts. Lock up. No goodbye. No thank you. Just instructions." Like I was the housekeeper. Like I didn't matter. I made coffee and brought Sophie her usual almond milk. She sat near the window hugging her sky blue pillow, the one she always clung to when the house was too loud or too quiet. I sat across from her. No one else was home. No one was coming back soon. And then Sophie moved her hand. Her fingers formed something I recognized, a basic sign we had practiced. "They left you behind again." I blinked. Then her fingers moved again. "We have plans, too." For a moment, I just stared at her. Her face was calm, unreadable, but her hands had spoken the loudest truth I'd heard in months. Sophie, this silent girl who everyone pitied and underestimated, was the only person in the Monroe family who had ever actually seen me. She had seen the moment I was cast aside, and she didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me like a partner. For the first time since Eric broke the news, I smiled. Not for them, not for show, but for myself. Because in that moment, something shifted inside me. I wasn't being left behind. I was being set apart. They had their trip to Hawaii, but something told me I had just been given something much more powerful. A chance to finally wake up. The house was quiet. Too quiet. For the first time since I married into the Monroe family, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator without being drowned out by Cynthia's instructions. Eric's dismissive silences, or the constant sense that I was somehow always in the way. I stood in the kitchen with a warm mug of vanilla coffee in my hands, staring at the morning light slanting through the blinds. They had left Cynthia, Eric, all of them gone to Hawaii for their grand family trip. Without me. Without so much as a conversation. I told myself to enjoy the silence, to breathe. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something unfinished was waiting in the room down the hall. I knocked lightly on Sophie's door, then entered as I always did. "Morning," I said softly, cradling the mug in both hands. "I used the vanilla blend, your favorite." I stepped in and almost dropped the cup. Sophie was already sitting up in bed, unaided. No struggle, no stiffness, no fumbling with the headboard like usual. She turned to me with a calm, unreadable expression. "You might want to sit down," she said. Her voice, real, soft but confident. I froze in place. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Calm down. Don't freak out," she added, almost amused. I placed the coffee on the nightstand with shaking hands and dropped into the armchair beside her bed. I wasn't sure whether to be scared, angry, or relieved. My mind spun, rewinding through years of helping her brush her hair, adjust her pillow, push her wheelchair, all of it now unraveling into something else. Something deliberate. "You can walk?" I finally asked. She nodded, "Since I was 10. And talk." "Obviously," she said with a small smile. "But I haven't not in front of them. Not in years." I pressed my fingers to my temples as if I could physically hold my thoughts still. "I don't understand." "Why pretend?" Sophie folded her hands neatly in her lap. "Because when you're helpless, they stop expecting things. They stop watching. And sometimes being invisible is safer." She told me everything. About the fever when she was a child. Real but not the full story. About how Cynthia had waited too long to call the doctor. How her father had come home from a business trip to find Sophie barely conscious. About how in the weeks that followed, Sophie realized something terrifying: her stepmother didn't see her as a daughter. She saw her as a burden, so I made a choice, Sophie said quietly. I let them believe what they wanted. It was the only way to survive in that house. The anger came slow, then sharp. All those years, all those quiet mornings, silent dinners, every time I'd watch Cynthia hover over Sophie's care like some martyr complaining about how hard it all was. And Sophie had just taken it, played her part, for safety, for control. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked, barely above a whisper. She looked at me with a kind of clarity I had never seen before. "Because you're the first person who ever looked at me like I was a person. Not a project, not a pity case. And because we have a flight to catch." I blinked. "Excuse me?" Sophie stood. Not shakily, not like someone relearning her legs, but with the grace of someone who had known for a long time that she was stronger than people thought. She walked across the room, opened the closet, and pulled out a small suitcase. "I booked 2 tickets to Hawaii last week. I've had everything ready for a while." But how, I asked. "How did you even—" "Dad left me money." Cynthia didn't know. "He created a private trust for me just before he died. I've been keeping it safe for the right moment." And this is the moment I asked. Still unable to believe what I was hearing, she nodded. "They think they control the story, but they don't. Not anymore. I'm done playing small, and so are you." I stared at her. At this girl who had been painted as fragile, silent, helpless. And yet, here she was dressed in jeans and a white linen blouse, tossing her sketchbook into a travel bag with all the quiet power of someone who had waited long enough. My mouth was dry. "You want me to come with you?" "I need you to," she said. "Not as a caretaker, as an ally. You've seen them. You know what they are. But more than that, they need to see us. Really see us." I swallowed hard. When they left me behind, I thought it was an ending. But now it felt like the beginning of something bigger. Maybe this wasn't just about Sophie. Maybe it was about both of us finally refusing to disappear. We packed quickly. There wasn't much to take. A few changes of clothes essentials, hurried my laptop. Sophie showed me the confirmation emails, the flights, the hotel booking at a resort near Waikiki, even a dinner reservation at the very restaurant where Cynthia had bragged they'd celebrate their family unity. It was like watching a carefully planned chess game unfold. We arrived at the airport just before dawn, keeping our heads down. No fanfare, no need for drama, just purpose. On the plane, I watched the clouds roll past the window and tried to calm the storm inside me. Sophie sat beside me, sketching in her notebook as if it were any other day. She wasn't pretending anymore. And I realized neither was I. I wasn't the obedient daughter-in-law anymore. The one who always stayed quiet, always accepted the role handed to her like a worn-out uniform. I was becoming something else, someone else. When we landed in Hawaii, the air hit us like a warm breath. We stepped off the plane, found our luggage, and hailed a taxi that Sophie had already arranged. She gave the address to the driver, then leaned back and looked at me. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. "Ask me again after dinner." She smiled. "Fair enough." We arrived at the resort, a stretch of luxury along the sand, with palm trees lining the drive and ocean views on every side. The check-in process was smooth. Everything had been prepaid under Sophie's name. We took the elevator to our room. As we stepped inside, I finally let myself look out the window. The ocean shimmered. The wind moved the palms gently. Somewhere, families were laughing. Couples were sipping drinks by the pool. I wasn't here as part of a family vacation. I was here to expose one. I turned to Sophie. "What's the plan?" She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot. A dinner reservation, 7 Huzru p.m. Same restaurant Cynthia had posted about. Same poolside spot where they'd toast to being a perfect family. "We go," Sophie said. "We dress how we want. We walk in when the lights are brightest. And then we let the truth do what it always does, cut through the performance." I took a deep breath. There was fear, yes, but there was also freedom. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't the one left behind. I was walking beside someone who had been left behind even longer and who had decided enough was enough. Tomorrow would be war. Tonight we would rest. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that made Rachel think of empty churches or closed museums, hollow, almost sacred, but not in a comforting way. The Monroe household, once filled with Cynthia's sharp voice echoing from one end of the kitchen to the other, was now still. Eric, Cynthia, and the rest had boarded their flight to Hawaii before dawn, and by the time Rachel opened the blinds, the sky over Raleigh was already brushing a soft gold against the neighbor's rooftop. She stood in the kitchen, holding a steaming mug of vanilla blend coffee, Sophie's favorite. It was almost habit now, bringing it up to the room, even though Sophie never asked. It was just something Rachel did because no one else did. She knocked lightly on the door. "Morning," she called gently. No reply as always. She opened the door and stepped inside, and froze. Sophie wasn't lying down in her usual curled position by the window. She was sitting upright, not propped up with pillows, not being adjusted into place. Sitting, back straight, calm, awake. Then as Rachel took another hesitant step, Sophie turned her head slowly and smiled and said, "Calm down, don't freak out." The mug slipped. It didn't break, but the coffee sloshed onto Rachel's sleeve. She didn't even flinch. I don't understand," Rachel whispered. "You talk?" Sophie nodded, her voice level and smooth. "Walk too. But we'll get to that." Rachel stared. Her mouth opened once, then closed. Her chest tightened, like her body was trying to decide between screaming or fainting. "I know," Sophie said, folding her hands in her lap. "It's a lot." "You this whole time," Rachel's voice was barely above a breath. "You've been able to—" "Yes." Sophie looked at her plainly. "Since I was 10. Rachel sat down in the armchair across from her. Her knees weren't steady. Why, she asked, finally her voice hoarse. Why would you pretend? Why would you let them think? Let me think. Sophie exhaled slowly. Because sometimes pretending to be broken is safer than showing you're whole. Rachel blinked but didn't respond. Sophie's tone didn't change as she continued. When I was 8, I had a fever. Dad wasn't home. Cynthia was. She said it would pass, that I was being dramatic. She didn't take me to the hospital until I collapsed. Rachel winced. They told her I had no lasting damage. But the moment we got home, she told the neighbors I'd suffered brain damage, that I couldn't speak, that I couldn't walk without help. She made the lie real. And you just went along with it. Rachel's voice cracked. Sophie's eyes, calm and clear, locked on hers. I realized something early. The more helpless I seemed, the less she paid attention. She stopped yelling, stopped touching me, stopped looking at me like I was a mistake. That was peace, Rachel. But Eric, he believed all of it. He believed what was convenient. Just like Cynthia. Just like most people do when the lie fits their comfort better than the truth. Rachel felt like the floor had tilted. Everything, every glance, every pitying smile, every assumption crumbled beneath her. Why tell me now? Sophie leaned forward, her expression softening. Because you're the only one who ever treated me like a person. You brought me coffee, sat beside me, talked to me even when you thought I couldn't answer. You saw me. And now I want to show you something. She stood up. No cane, no brace, no hesitation. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. You're walking. I've always been able to. But it took years before I trusted anyone enough to show them. Sophie reached into her closet and pulled out a small silver suitcase. She placed it on the bed, clicked it open, and turned it toward Rachel. Inside was a plane ticket. 2, actually. Round trip. Raleigh to Honolulu. Departure tomorrow morning. Rachel looked up, stunned. You booked flight months ago, Sophie nodded. And the hotel, and the restaurant, everything. But why? Sophie's voice dropped into something deeper, more grounded. Because I'm tired of being someone else's burden. And I'm tired of watching you be treated like a servant in your own marriage. Rachel's throat tightened. Sophie continued. We're not going there to ruin their vacation. We're going to reclaim what they tried to take. My autonomy, your dignity, our truth. Rachel stood up slowly, walking toward the suitcase like it might vanish if she blinked. But how? What will we even do there? Sophie smiled. You'll see. The next morning, Rachel dressed in jeans and a soft cardigan, still unsure if she was dreaming. But the Uber came. The airport check-in went smoothly. And as the plane lifted off the tarmac, a strange sense of clarity washed over her. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something cooler. Like truth finding its shape. Sophie sat beside her sunglasses on flipping through a small black notebook filled with handwritten notes, confirmation numbers, hotel details. You've really planned all this? Rachel whispered, still in awe. Sophie smiled without looking up. I've had a lot of quiet time to think. When they landed in Honolulu, the heat hit them like an exhale. The sky was impossibly blue. The palm trees seemed to sway just for them. The driver who picked them up held a sign that said Monroe S. in neat capital letters. At the resort, check-in was swift. Sophie had booked a suite in a different wing than her family's. Close enough to see them, she explained, but not close enough to be seen unless we want to. Inside the room, Rachel set down her bag and stood by the window. The ocean glimmered like a secret. I don't know what to feel, she admitted. Angry, nervous, free, maybe all of it. You don't have to name it, Sophie said gently. Just feel it. That night, after unpacking and resting, Sophie laid out the plan. They're having dinner at the poolside restaurant, she said, pointing to a schedule she'd printed out from her stepmother's email account. 6 sharp. They'll think they're safe. Rachel hesitated. And what do? We don't storm in, Sophie replied. We let them talk. Let them show who they are. Then we show who we are. Her words carried a quiet power. Rachel looked at her, a woman once confined to a wheelchair, now leading a mission with unwavering poise, and felt something shift. This wasn't a confrontation. This was a reclamation. By 5:45 p.m., Rachel had changed into a navy dress, simple but graceful. Sophie wore emerald green hair tied back calm and steady. They waited by the glass partition just off the restaurant deck, watching from a distance. There they were, Cynthia, Eric, and an unfamiliar woman seated beside him laughing over wine. Rachel's breath caught. Sophie touched her arm. Ready? Rachel nodded. Let's begin. The sun was just beginning to drop behind the curve of the Pacific, spilling a warm golden hue across the glass windows of the resort. From their suite on the third floor, Rachel Monroe stood still, watching the horizon, with a quiet resolve in her chest. This was no longer just a tropical getaway or a symbolic confrontation. This was the stage, and the curtain was about to rise. Sophie adjusted the thin strap of her silk top, the emerald fabric catching the light as she moved through the room. Her hair was pinned back, her face clear, calm. She no longer resembled the fragile, voiceless girl in a wheelchair. That Sophie had been a lie crafted by fear. And now the truth stood tall beside Rachel, ready to be seen. Rachel touched her reflection in the mirror, navy dress hair soft around her shoulders, lips pressed in a steady line. It had been years since she'd felt this prepared. Maybe ever. You don't have to do this, Sophie said, gently behind her. Rachel met her eyes in the mirror. Yes, I do. Downstairs, the open-air restaurant glowed beneath strands of string lights, the sound of soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers. Waitstaff moved quickly between tables set beside the infinity pool, delivering cocktails, desserts, and whispered congratulations to tourists in sunburned skin and linen shirts. It looked like paradise. But for Rachel, the next few minutes would feel more like a reckoning. Sophie guided them through the palms and past the reception area with practiced ease. She knew the layout. She knew the timing. Her stepmother, Cynthia, had booked the family's table for 6:00 p.m., poolside far right under the largest umbrella. Sophie had made their own reservation for 7:00, just close enough to watch the show unfold. They were seated at a table 2 rows behind Cynthia's, close enough to hear the laughter, see the raised glasses, and notice the way Rachel's husband, Eric, leaned in just a little too close to the woman beside him. A stranger in a crimson halter dress, with perfectly curled hair. Someone who didn't belong. Rachel's breath caught. That's her, Sophie whispered, confirming it with a subtle nod. Rachel didn't reply. She watched as Cynthia Monroe clinked her wine glass against the other woman's in a gesture far too familiar. Celebratory. Triumphant. And yet, they had left her behind. Asked her to care for Sophie while they indulged in tropical cocktails and secret alliances. I placed a recorder earlier today, Sophie murmured. Tucked it beneath the planter by their table. You should hear this. She slid a discreet earpiece into Rachel's palm. Rachel hesitated, then slipped it in, letting the static clear. The words that followed were worse than imagined. I don't know why he ever married her, Cynthia was saying. That girl never brought anything but obligation. I'm handling it, Eric's voice replied, low and oily. After this trip, I'll talk to a lawyer. Say we grew apart. Emotional neglect. It'll hold. Rachel's chest went cold. She wasn't sure if it was betrayal or confirmation that hurt more. And the money, the other woman asked softly. I've got a plan, Eric replied. We flip the narrative. Say I've been the one caring for Sophie. That Rachel left us hanging. I already have some documents prepped. This whole setup, it's working. Rachel's hands trembled beneath the white tablecloth. Sophie didn't speak. She didn't have to. I'm ready, Rachel whispered. They stood weaving their way through the dining area. With each step, Rachel felt her fear thinning. She wasn't there to argue. She wasn't there to beg for answers. She was there to end the lie. Eric was mid-laugh when he saw her. His smile faltered. Cynthia's fork froze halfway to her mouth. The other woman blinked, unsure if she was part of a prank or a collision. "Good evening, Rachel," said her voice steady. "Didn't expect to see me, did you?" Eric stood up too quickly, nearly knocking over his chair. "Rachel, what are you doing here?" Sophie stepped forward next. "That's the wrong question," she said evenly. "The real one is, what are you doing here? With her?" Gasps flickered from nearby tables. Heads turned. Rachel reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and pressed play. Cynthia's voice filled the air. "Say she's emotionally neglectful. Then, Eric, it'll hold." The silence that followed was deafening. "I don't think you need dessert anymore," Rachel said flatly. "Wait, we can explain." Eric stammered. "No, you can't." Rachel cut him off. "Because every word you just said proves what I've always felt. That I was never part of this family. Just someone useful. Until I wasn't." "You don't get to rewrite the story now," Sophie added, looking directly at Cynthia. "I kept quiet because it was safer. But your silence is over." Rachel turned her gaze to the woman in red. "If you think this man treats women with respect, good luck." The woman slowly stood, grabbed her clutch, and without a word disappeared into the night. Eric tried to follow. Cynthia reached for his sleeve. "Sit down," she hissed, but no one was listening anymore. Rachel looked at them one last time. "This table, it was never meant for people like me, right? But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't meant for people like you either." Then she walked away with Sophie past the candlelit tables, past the whispering tourists, past the perfect illusion of paradise. The evening air felt lighter with each step. Back in their suite, Rachel sat on the balcony with a glass of water legs tucked beneath her. Sophie joined her quietly. "You okay?" Rachel nodded. "Better than I've been in years." Below them, waves rolled gently across the shore. "That wasn't about revenge," Rachel said. "It was about ending the part of me that thought I needed their love to be real." Sophie didn't reply. She simply placed a hand on Rachel's and whispered, "You're finally free." And for the first time in years, Rachel believed it. The next morning, Rachel awoke not to the sounds of judgment or obligation, but to the hush of waves and the warm glow of sun streaking across the white sheets. It was the first time in 2 years that she had slept through the night without her mind replaying old conversations, questioning her own worth, or fearing what her in-laws might criticize next. For the first time, no one was calling her name with a demand attached. And that quiet, it wasn't empty, it was peace. She slipped out of bed, padded barefoot to the small kitchenette, and made herself a cup of tea. Sophie was already seated on the balcony, knees drawn to her chest, sketching something in her notebook. She didn't look up when Rachel joined her, but she smiled. Rachel sipped her tea slowly. "I didn't realize how much power they had over me. Until last night." Sophie nodded. "They only controlled what you gave them." That sentence lingered in the space between them. It wasn't meant to scold, it was simply truth. By mid-morning, the whispers had already started. Sophie's phone buzzed with a text from a cousin who had no idea Rachel was even in Hawaii. Another came from a former classmate of Eric's, saw a post on Reddit. Is it true? Apparently, someone at the restaurant had filmed the confrontation. The audio wasn't perfect, but the expressions, the guilt, the cracks, the panic had spread like wildfire. Cynthia, who once demanded Rachel fold napkins a certain way at Thanksgiving, was now being publicly questioned as a manipulative matriarch. Eric was being roasted in comment sections for suggesting emotional neglect as a divorce tactic, while clearly planning an affair. They weren't just losing control of the story, they had lost control of the audience. That night, Rachel and Sophie stayed in their room. Not because they were hiding, but because there was nothing more to chase. The truth was already breathing outside their door, and neither of them needed to explain themselves anymore until the knock came. Sharp, slow, familiar. Rachel froze. Sophie looked up from her laptop. That's them. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. You're sure? I recognize the rhythm. That's her knock. Cynthia. Always 3 taps. Like it's a courtroom, not a house. Rachel stood but didn't move toward the door. For a long moment, she simply stared at it. Another knock, this time accompanied by a voice. Rachel, it's your mother-in-law. I'd like to speak to you, please. Rachel said nothing. Then Eric's voice muffled but recognizable. Rachel, please. Just 5 minutes. Sophie's face hardened. You don't owe them a single second. I know, Rachel whispered. But I want them to see what they left behind. She opened the door. Cynthia stood in a linen dress, hair pulled back tightly, but her usual sharpness had dulled. Her eyes flicked past Rachel into the suite. Eric stood behind her, disheveled lips pursed like a man walking into a courtroom with no lawyer. Rachel didn't step aside. You came all this way? She said coolly. But you never once asked why I left. We didn't know, Cynthia began. We thought. You thought I would stay quiet forever? Rachel interrupted. You thought I would play along, care for Sophie, clean up your lies, and accept whatever scraps you labeled as love. Eric stepped forward. Rachel, please. No, she said firmer this time. You lied to me. You planned a vacation with another woman while asking me to babysit your sister. You told me I was part of the family, but the truth is I was just a convenience. Cynthia folded her arms. And this public performance, that was dignified. Rachel's voice dropped quiet but cutting. No, it was honest. Something you wouldn't recognize if it wore a name tag and shook your hand. Eric's shoulders slumped. We just want to fix this. Sophie's voice rose behind Rachel. You don't fix what you intentionally shattered. You bury it and move on. Cynthia's eyes narrowed. Sophie, you're speaking now, walking. I have been for a long time. Sophie replied, stepping into the doorway beside Rachel. I just never felt safe showing it. Because in this family, strength gets punished and weakness gets pitied. And neither of those let you live freely. The hallway went silent. Eric looked like he might cry. Cynthia looked like she already had. Though Rachel suspected it wasn't from guilt, but from the realization that her power was slipping. We're not here to fight, Eric finally said. I've lost my job. Malene left. We just wanted to say we're sorry. Rachel stared at him, then said evenly, You're not sorry. You're just losing. There's a difference. She didn't slam the door. She simply closed it with a soft, final click. Later that night, Rachel and Sophie sat by the beach with takeout poke bowls and cans of sparkling water. The moon hung low and bright over the ocean. Tourists walked past in sandals and sundresses, laughter echoing in bursts. Rachel exhaled. They came all this way to say sorry, but only because they were exposed. Sophie nodded. Real apologies come without an audience. They ate in silence for a while. The salt from the sea, the hum of nearby music, the soft crush of waves, it all wrapped around them like a blanket. Eventually, Sophie reached into her tote and pulled out an envelope. She handed it to Rachel. What's this? Rachel asked. Sophie smiled. Something I never showed anyone. Inside was a letter, handwritten, dated 3 years ago. Rachel began to read. To my future self, you're not broken. You're not invisible. You are just living in a space that hasn't made room for your voice. One day you will walk into that space and speak, and they will listen, or they will leave. Either way, you'll be free. Tears prickled at Rachel's eyes. She folded the letter slowly and held it in her lap. Did you write that for you or me? Sophie looked at her. Both. The next morning, Rachel packed her things with a clarity she hadn't known in years. She didn't leave a note. She didn't check social media. She didn't feel the need to see how Cynthia or Eric were responding to the online backlash. She had seen everything she needed to. At the airport, as the final boarding call echoed overhead, Rachel turned to Sophie. You ever wonder what you'll do now? Now that it's over? Sophie smiled, eyes bright. No, I wonder what I'll do next. They walked toward the gate together, no baggage, except what they chose to carry. And from now on, they would carry only truth. I didn't think I'd ever see that dining room again, not by choice. The long mahogany table. The beige linen napkins folded into stiff pyramids. The smell of lemon oil polish clinging to the chairs. For 2 years I had sat quietly along the sides of that table, serving dishes, refilling water glasses, laughing when laughter was required. Always a guest. Never a member. And now I stood at the head of it. A week after Hawaii, the fallout had moved faster than any of us predicted. The video had spread beyond Reddit and Facebook threads. A lifestyle blogger picked it up, then a small news outlet. And suddenly, the Monroe name, once synonymous with family values, was trending for all the wrong reasons. Eric was let go from his firm pending investigation. Cynthia withdrew from her garden club presidency citing health concerns. Even Malene, his mistress, disabled her social media after someone leaked the voice recordings from that night. I didn't need to twist the knife. They were already bleeding out from wounds of their own making, and still they called. At first I ignored them. But Sophie, ever the strategist, had other ideas. "We're not just walking away," she said calmly, placing a paper in front of me. "We're taking back the house." I blinked. "What?" "It's in my name. Dad left it to me, not to Cynthia. And I think it's time you got what you were denied." I stared at the document, my fingers tracing the legal language. My father-in-law had quietly transferred ownership of the Raleigh house to Sophie in his will, knowing Cynthia would never honor it. Sophie had waited until now. "This will be your closure," she said. "A dinner, one night, just you, sitting at the head of the table." So we planned it. An invitation went out, handwritten, polite, brief. "Monroe family dinner. Sunday at 6:00 p.m. House has changed ownership. Attendance encouraged." We didn't need to yell. The silence would do it for us. Sunday arrived with a gray sky and scattered rain, the kind that blurred windows and turned silence into something heavier. I dressed simply, a navy sheath dress, my hair pulled into a low bun. No jewelry, no frills, just presence. I arrived early. Sophie met me at the front door, keys in hand. "It's yours now," she said, "but tonight I'll stand behind you." The house was almost exactly as I remembered, except colder, emptier. The family portraits had been removed. The photos of Cynthia at her charity events were missing from the mantel. The only frame that remained was one Sophie had placed deliberately, a photo of the two of us on the beach in Hawaii, arms linked, wind in our hair, truth in our smiles. The first to arrive was Eric. He stepped through the door like a man entering a courtroom, shoulders tense, eyes darting. "Rachel," he said, voice low. I didn't offer a smile. I didn't offer a seat. "Take a place at the table," I said evenly. "Dinner will be served shortly." Next came Cynthia. She wore gray, not black, not white, just the color of in-between. Her lipstick was smudged, her heels too tall for comfort. She looked around the house like it had betrayed her. "You changed the furniture," she remarked stiffly. "I changed the air," I replied. "It needed cleaning." She opened her mouth to respond, but thought better of it. They sat in silence. I served the meal myself. One course, no wine, just water and clarity. Halfway through the meal, Eric cleared his throat. "Rachel, I didn't think it would get this far." I looked at him. "You didn't think I would." He lowered his gaze. Cynthia picked up her fork, set it down, then spoke. "This used to be my home, and for years you made sure I never felt welcome in it," I said calmly. "Now it's your turn to feel what that's like." The words weren't bitter, just true. Sophie emerged quietly from the kitchen, placing a stack of folders on the table. Divorce paperwork, property reassignment, documentation of financial misconduct, all notarized, all ready. Eric paled. Cynthia stiffened. "I'm not here to punish you," I said. "I'm here to complete what you started. You wanted me gone. But I left first. You wanted me erased, but I've written myself back in. And now I'm closing the chapter. Eric reached for the pen. His hand trembled. This isn't how I wanted it to end. You should have considered that before you began, I replied. Cynthia looked like she might speak, but Sophie stepped forward. Mom, she said softly, you told everyone I was broken, and I played along because I was afraid of you, of your control, of your silence. Sophie laid a small envelope beside Cynthia's plate. Inside is a letter Dad wrote you before he passed. You never opened it. I did. Cynthia flinched. He asked you to love all your children, even the ones that didn't fit your story. Cynthia's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. Her eyes didn't meet ours. I stood from my seat. This house will be repainted. The table will be donated. The walls will be cleaned. But this, I placed my hand on the back of the chair I once sat beside. This is the only thing that needed changing. I walked toward the door, Sophie beside me. Eric called after me. Will you ever forgive us? I turned back. No, but I will forget you, in time. And with that, I stepped outside. That night I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I poured myself a cup of peppermint tea, sat on the small patio of my new apartment, and watched the rain come down on the street below. There was no applause, no audience, just stillness. In the silence, I remembered the girl I had been, the one who tiptoed around Cynthia's rules, who folded towels in fear, who stayed up at night trying to be enough. She was gone now, replaced by a woman who had sat at the head of the table and made it hers, not by demand, but by truth. Because in the end, dignity is the loudest voice in the room, and that night mine echoed from every corner. Rachel Monroe's story isn't just about exposing betrayal. It's about reclaiming self-worth with quiet strength. Personally, I believe silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes it's the space we need to prepare for our loudest comeback. Rachel didn't scream to demand respect. She showed up with facts, dignity, and the unshakable truth. In the end, she didn't wait for a seat, she claimed the head of the table. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or pushed into the background, remember this. You don't need an invitation to take your place in your own life. You just need to rise. If this story moved you, give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more empowering journeys like this. Because sometimes the quietest voices tell the most powerful truths.